The creative process is ultimately about copying, transforming, and combining elements to create something new. Figuring out whether copying is acceptable or not is highly nuanced and dependent on the context. For example, why is this considered acceptable to customers, but this isn't? And here's an even weirder example. The instrument at the bottom is the copy, but it often costs 2 to 3 times more than the original design. In this video, we're going to explore the nuances of copying in design, when it's permissible, when it's not, and why it's such an important part of creativity. So let's talk about each of these creative processes: copying, transforming, and combining. Some might say that copying is never acceptable in a design context, but I would argue that most of the time it's actually fine as long as you're honest about it. Let's go back to those bass guitars. The copy, called a Sadowski, appears to be a blatant copy of the Fender. Why would customers be okay with that? I think the main reason is that Sadowski isn't trying to trick you into thinking it's a Fender bass. They don't hide it at all. Instead, they're honoring Fender guitars and copying their design as a token of respect and admiration. It's like a tribute. Sadowski's copies often command a price that's 2 to 3 times more than the original Fender designs because they're so incredibly well built. And this isn't an isolated example either. You see it in watches, you see it in eyewear, and even in shoes. As long as the people doing the copying are doing it as a tribute or a token of respect, it's generally accepted by customers. There's also this weird thing that happens where people just accept that it's permissible to copy a design if it's very successful and it's been around for a while. So for example, many shoe companies produce their own version of a penny loafer. The penny loafer was an incredibly successful design, and it sold really well for several decades. It was, and still is, a classic shoe. Even though all of these different brands are creating their own penny loafer designs that are barely distinguishable from each other, it's totally acceptable to copy the original penny loafer. But even the original penny loafer wasn't original. They were a combination of Native American moccasins and Norwegian fishing shoes. The deeper you dig, the more you realize that seemingly massive innovations are just remixes of existing ideas. You take the old and reformulate it into something new. There are other times when copying is accepted too. I mean, copying is one of the fastest ways to learn a new skill. For example, most car designers start out by drawing or even tracing existing cars. They try to understand the overall proportions, the package, the wheelbases, and overhangs, and copying is just a great way to understand the decisions made by the original designer. Copying the masters is a tradition in art that spans several thousands of years. After you're done copying, you can begin to explore new concepts and ideas that build on that framework. It's similar to how musicians learn from the masters by playing along to their songs. We need copying to build a foundation in our skills. The only time copying really crosses the line is if you try to pass off your copy as an original in a deceptive way. It's basically when you're trying to make a knockoff. The people making the knockoffs are able to sell their goods for cheaper because they typically use lower quality components, and they also don't have to make up for the costly R&D budgets that the original creator had to spend. I don't think anyone should just blatantly copy without adding any sort of incremental improvement, and I think it's even worse when the people doing the copying try to trick customers into thinking it's the original. The other creative processes I want to talk about are transforming and combining. The most famous example of this is Apple copying several elements of Braun's designs and then transforming them with their innovative technology. Yes, they definitely look like Braun's designs, but they're products with completely new and different functionality. They're not just taking Braun's designs and making another radio. Instead, they're using the radio as a visual inspiration for their iPod design. And that's why I consider this transforming rather than just copying. Now, the Apple-Braun comparison is a very well-documented example, but the lineage goes even further back than that. The Braun design team took inspiration from the Bauhaus school, and Walter Gropius, the founder of the Bauhaus school, took inspiration from modernism, constructivism, and the English arts and crafts movement. The arts and crafts movement was a reaction against the overly ornamental designs and low-quality mass-produced products. The movement was all about creating well-made goods with a handcrafted touch and an emphasis on pure materiality. Modernism was basically about starting over. It was largely a reaction to the excessive detail of Art Nouveau, but it was also an attempt to create something fresh and new after the horrors of World War I. The Bauhaus movement was sort of a subcategory of modernism, and it was all about a rational, form follows function approach to design, with a complete lack of decoration as part of their ethos. Russian Constructivism was another subcategory of modernism, and it was all about creating bold propaganda that relied heavily on highly contrasting geometric forms and colors, completely divorced from any sort of traditional decoration, in an attempt to separate themselves from the Romanov Empire that they were rebelling against. This transformational creative pursuit is not always perfectly linear, but you could go back in time endlessly to figure out how each of these movements transformed and built off of the one before it. We're all part of an endless continuum of transformational design. Each step builds on the next. One of the best things that you can do for your design work is try to go as far back in the continuum as possible. While a lot of people are trying to copy Apple, a better idea is to perhaps try to understand the Bauhaus principles or read up on the philosophy behind the arts and crafts movement and try to understand that instead. By the way, if you're still watching, you should totally subscribe. Click the red button below. If you really like what I'm talking about, you can also check out my course, Form Fundamentals, where I teach you the principles of industrial design, including how you can analyze any product and apply the principles to your own work in a fresh and new way. The link is in the description. But back to the video now. More recently, there was some controversy surrounding the Peak Design Everyday Sling Bag. Basically, Peak Design was saying that Amazon ripped off their design and sold it at a fraction of the price by using cheaper materials and making use of their economies of scale. Peak Design made a video about it, and as a marketing effort, Peak Design was incredibly successful. The video got about 4.6 million views to date, and it probably got them a ton of new customers and sales. It was also an excellent way to separate themselves from other low-end bags by highlighting what makes their designs great. However, I think the argument that they make about Amazon copying them is a bit of a stretch. I mean, yeah, the Amazon sling bag looks very similar to the Peak Design bag, but so does pretty much every camera sling, including ones designed before the Peak Design bag came out. Camera slings have very specific constraints and requirements, and it needs to hold very specific camera-related items like lenses and a laptop, and it's a form that needs to fit comfortably on the body. Because the requirements are fairly rigid, it's not really that surprising that all of these camera sling bags look very similar to each other. I would argue that Amazon identified a top-selling item and transformed it to fit a different market. Most people can't afford an $80 camera bag. Amazon is offering a more modestly priced design with fewer bells and whistles. To me, this is a transformation. Anyone who knows anything about camera bags will be able to quickly identify that the Amazon bag is a budget item, and you get what you pay for. I think the only area where Amazon may have crossed a line was to use the Everyday Sling name for their product. Overall, I think that Peak Design was absolutely masterful in taking control of the narrative and separating themselves from their low-end competitors. But I don't really see what's so unethical about Amazon making a lower-priced version of Peak Design's bag. As products become more and more optimized over time, they start to look similar. Cars are a great example of how constraints determine design and form factor. This is a list of safety regulations just for the headlights and taillights of a car. But the fact that there are so many constraints around safety, ergonomics, engineering, and cost is really not helping. As products become more and more optimized and constrained over time, they start to look more similar to each other. Now, make no mistake, these constraints are certainly not the only reason why a lot of homogenized products look so similar. I did another video that talks about it. A lot of innovation happens when you try to take disparate ideas and combine them so that they can be put in a new context or be given a new function. The Biosound Emerge looks to be inspired by the Mist Vase. Bang & Olufsen used the Mist Vase in their own promotional images on social media, and many of the designers worked in similar circles. There's no way to prove whether or not the designers who made the Biosound Emerge actually took inspiration from the Mist Vase. I guess we could ask them, but whether it's coincidental or not, the Emerge speaker and the Mist Vase are part of a long line of transformational iterations. Fluted edges on glass dates back to the mid to late 1800s, or maybe even earlier. I asked Tamer how he came up with the shape for his vase, and he told me that he literally just bent a piece of A4 paper to come up with the initial shape. He took existing materials and gave them a new context in a transformative way. Now, you might be thinking, well, John, it's easy for you to say that copying isn't a big deal because you're not the one being copied. But the thing is, my YouTube videos have been blatantly copied by other creators before. People quote things that I say in my videos without crediting me pretty often. And I'll be honest, it used to annoy me when I first started out, but now I just understand that it's part of the game. If you do good work, you're going to get copied. And I'd rather just spend my time working on my next project instead of wasting all that mental energy worrying about the copiers. And my design work has been copied as well. In one of my more recent projects, I posted a video about my design process for a bass guitar I was building. Several people wrote public comments for everyone to see that they intended to copy my design. I would appreciate it if they credited me as a source of inspiration, but they certainly don't have to, and I accept that copiers are inevitable. Unless you have a massive legal team at your disposal, my best advice is to just continue pushing forward and designing new stuff. The best way to combat the copiers is to always be one step ahead, working on the next big thing. And make no mistake, copying is not beneath me either. Stuart Hicks made a video called When Architects Copy, and I took some of his ideas and adapted them to an industrial design context. I also copied a lot of elements from the Everything is a Remix series by Kirby Ferguson. While the core tenets of this video are very similar to his, my aim was to transform the content in a way that brought something new to the table. And I do this in my design work too. Your unique experiences shape your thoughts and your ideas in a way that no one else can replicate. Your individual voice is what will make you stand out. But this whole concept of the genius who pulls ideas out of thin air is antiquated, and quite frankly, it's false. We're all standing on the shoulders of giants. Creativity is an evolutionary process, and we are all just one very small but important link in the chain. Thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button like it insulted your mother. It's totally free for you and it really helps me out. Have a great day.